Welcome to the Spot On Insurance Podcast, brought to you by Insurance Licensing Services of America, ILSA. This is Ted Tavares.
And this is Arlene Tavares coming to you from beautiful Puerto Rico. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at a topic that affects every single one of us.
But before we get started, don't forget to click on the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And now here's our host, Doug Foresta.
Hello and welcome. This is Doug Foresta. Thanks for joining me. And today, my guest is Melissa Agnes. And let me say a little bit about Melissa. Bring it right on. Melissa Agnes helps global brands and governments prevent and manage a wide range of issues and crises. Her client list includes financial organizations, technology companies, healthcare organizations, many other types of organizations. And she speaks worldwide to audiences including NATO, Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Ministries of Foreign Defense. And in 2015, she gave a TEDx talk in Los Angeles where she discussed the secret to successful crisis management in the 21st century. You can learn more about her at melissaagnes.com. And of course, we'll put some more links on the show page. Melissa Agnes, welcome.
Thank you, Doug. It's nice to be here.
Thank you so much. So yeah, this is a topic I think that's become only more relevant as each day, I think. But one of the things I wanted to start with is that you say that there's no such thing as a social media crisis. Now, can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. Okay. So, and it bugs me. So back a few years ago, when I started in this field, in this industry, sure, there was such thing as a social media crisis because it was so new and things, that escalated to crisis level maintained themselves on social. But today, social media has evolved into a communications platform or a series of communications platforms that no matter what the crisis, no matter where it originates, whether it's a plane crash to something that actually originates online, social media is a factor in crisis management today. It's something that we have to be aware of, ready for, and know how to manage it simultaneously while we actually manage the crisis. So I think that's really what it is. The social media crisis, when you call it like that, what does that mean? There's nothing that's only contained to social media. And oftentimes as well is, professionals, people who aren't really aware of this, they'll call something a social media crisis. And so often it's not actually a crisis. It's just an issue that's gone viral on social. And there's a big difference. And it's an important difference for organizations to understand so that they can detect risk and its escalation and respond to it appropriately.
So that's great. Let's go into that. What is the difference between an issue and a crisis? That's
a great question. So the baseline that I always start, the definition kind of changes for every organization. So I always provide a baseline that every organization can take and leverage and then adapt to meet their own necessities. So basically, a crisis, you're looking at a few things. You're looking at an incident, a negative incident that's going to stop business as usual. So it's going to be to some degree all hands on deck, and it's going to be the primary focus of that time is to manage the incident. And the incident itself threatens to have a long-term negative effect on either people, environment, business operations, the organization's reputation, and or its bottom line. So that's kind of the criteria that I like to give as the definition of crisis versus an issue is still, it's a negative event, but it doesn't have a long-term or it doesn't threaten to have a long-term negative impact on those one or all of the five things that I just named.
In a moment, I'm going to ask you about, as we record this, one of the things that is been up in the media has been the airlines and United. But before I ask you about that, how can I, as an organization, if I'm a leader in an organization, how can I identify the risk of something going negatively viral? Are there things that I can look for?
100%. And this is actually something that's so important to, what I'll say now is so important to understand and to actually use to train and empower your team, because oftentimes it's the front line that's going to be the first people to detect what I'm going to say, which is exactly that. And it gives the organization the advantage of detecting the risk of virality in a negative situation. So there's three things that actually every single piece of viral content has, whether it's positive or negative, but we're going to look at it for the purpose of risk. And so the first thing is an emotionally compelling story. So something that is emotionally compelling, right? It draws our emotions into it. It provokes or invokes emotion within us. The second thing is relatability. So if you think about it, if a story, a negative situation is emotionally compelling and relatable, what are we going to do with it? We're going to share it. We're going to share it because we know that if we share it, the people that we share it with are going to feel those same things that we're feeling. And then the third thing I always attach to that is something in the sense of a short and catchy headline, a great hashtag, or content, file formats, content that is easy to go viral. So here we're looking at images, headline, or of course, video. And it's really, a short and catchy headline with a great video isn't going to necessarily send something to go viral. But if we attach that emotional relatability factor to it, the likelihood surges. So if we can look at a situation and we can say, okay, right off the start and assess, okay, is this emotionally compelling? Is it relatable? And is it being shared in a format that is very, very easy to continue to share on? Those would be, if you say yes to all three of those things and it's a negative situation, then it's definitely worth your attention and worth escalating to somebody within the organization who can then bring the right people in to really assess the potential impact of the incident on the organization.
So now I am going to ask you the question, as you were saying, is it easily shareable? I do think about that video with United. And, my question would be, if you have a situation like that where, with the video with United that really did go viral, how do you even begin to regain your positive reputation after something like that?
Okay. So that's
easier said than done, right? That's a big question, I know.
It's a big question because it's United. Right. So, and I'll explain. So first of all, I will say that had United understood these things that I just mentioned, both the definition of crisis or potential crisis, as well as the potential risk of something going viral, how to detect it. The second they saw that video, they would have known that they needed to respond, that everybody could put themselves in Dr. Dow's shoes. We could say, we fly. We've been mistreated in some capacity, hopefully not to that extent, but in some capacity by airlines. We've been taken for granted. We've been, whatever the case may be. We could put ourselves in that position of being in his chair, being the selected person to get off and having an important meeting or responsibility to get to and not wanting to get off. And so it was completely emotionally compelling and relatable. And the fact that it was a video, taken from fellow passengers, was that shareable content. So United, who took, I think it was 16 or 17 hours, I forget the exact number right now, but to actually put out a response. And when they put out the response, it was completely inadequate and just did not hit any of the marks that it needed to hit. It was a recipe for disaster, and they should have been better prepared. So I'll say that. And then to answer your question of how do you recover, you don't let it happen. And I know that when we look at honestly, when we look at United has a crisis of culture. They are constantly in the news, responding to issues in an inappropriate or ineffective way. As a keynote speaker, I am always referencing them as what not to do in times of issue or crisis.
That's not a good sign when your brand is right.
Always. I mean, I was using this one example, and then they came out with the next one, right away. So they have a crisis of culture, and for United, what it's going to take really to start to build real trust with people, with the market, with their customers, with potential customers, is that they need to fix that culture from the top down and then back from the bottom up, and proving themselves, not just in their words, but in their actions, and then how they manage, first of all, prevent this. I mean, this whole incident was preventable had they had the right culture in the first place, right? It didn't have to happen. It shouldn't have happened. And then their response was just disturbingly terrible. So it's a deeper question with United, but that's
and the point is not to beat up on United, but more so, I think that the takeaway here, what I'm hearing, the takeaway for organizations is, first of all, you have to assume everyone has access now to a smartphone. It's easy to take video anywhere, right? It's easy to create shareable content. So what I hear you saying too is you have to be really careful as an organization not to create a culture where these kinds of videos could even happen, mistakes are going to happen, but not to that degree.
Yeah. So what I always, when I'm consulting or even when I'm on stage, in order to implement a crisis-ready culture, the first steps are really, really simple. One, it's to identify. Every organization has a series of high-risk scenarios that pertain to their organization. These are the most likely types of crises to occur. Though you need to know what those are. You need to have that list. You need to have the discussion with all the different department heads, all the different regional heads, all the members of management and senior management to understand better or to identify even what your organization's high-risk scenarios are. This is a predictable scenario. And when you have those scenarios and you align those with the definition of a crisis versus an issue for your organization, at what point would scenario A be an issue and what would make it a crisis? Have a knowledge of those fundamentals throughout the organization. And then you can go deeper into each one of those scenarios and say, okay, well, what are the gaps or vulnerabilities here that we could actually fix to prevent this type of scenario from happening? And then in the case of where prevention is impossible, because prevention isn't always possible, how can we better prepare to, first of all, detect it early on so that we can get ahead of the story. We can position our organization as the credible source of information, as the leader of the crisis. And how would we go about doing that?
Spot On Insurance is sponsored by ILSA, Insurance Licensing Services of America, America's premier licensing and regulatory compliance experts. To learn more about ILSA and the services they provide, visit ilsainc.com. I know that you said, there's times when you want to respond, and then there's times when you want to maybe let something play out on social media without your organization's response. Can you explain a little bit about, when would it be appropriate that you want to make sure you respond to something? When would it be appropriate to let it maybe play out without a response?
Absolutely. So it's a bigger question, but I'm going to definitely give some insight into it. So understanding, issue versus crisis is a really good start, because if you see something negative unfold, you want to know whether or not it's a potential issue or a potential crisis. So that's going to also impact the way that you respond and approach the situation. The other thing too is that you always want to focus on how can we build and strengthen the trust that we have with those who matter most to our business, our stakeholders. So when that is our guiding beacon, and a negative event occurs and we say, okay, is there something here that we can do to reinforce trust, to build it, to, as my friend Captain Chris Young of the Mountain View Police Department loves to say, and I love the way he says it, is how can we continue to proactively put deposits into our bank of community trust, every day in every situation. And then the other thing too is, and I'll give you an example. It's also to know really what the fundamental values of the organization are. So for an example, a few years ago, Oreo wanted to, I can't remember the timing, but Oreo basically wanted to announce or just proclaim their support of the LGBT community. Mm. And so what they did was they visualized this. They took an Oreo and, the white filling.
I remember this, yes.
Yeah. So what they did was they photoshopped an Oreo, and the white filling was now super long, and it was the colors of the gay pride flag. And they posted that on, I believe it was a white background, onto social media, and not just as a picture on their Facebook wall, because that's where they did it, but as actually the banner of their Facebook page. And so that was a statement. That was a chosen statement, a proactive statement, something that they probably put a lot of thought and consideration into, and that they knew the risk of. They knew, but yet the benefits of, doing this for them were more profound, exceeded the risk. So what they did was they made this statement, and by making the statement, they changed their profile cover, not the profile cover, but the banner behind the profile cover on their Facebook page. They did that, and that's it. And they were smart enough to know what was going to happen. Of course, it's very controversial. People from both sides of this controversial topic, let's call it, posted, right? And the situation kind of went minorly viral. And, the media reported about it. Their Facebook page was flooding with comments from both sides. And what Oreo did was brilliant. They did nothing. Because what else can they do? They made a bold statement.
They said what they wanted to say.
There was nothing else to say. And had they been not so savvy, and they didn't, for some crazy reason, realize that this was going to spark controversy, and when they did it, they realized, oh crap, this is what we did. Let's remove it. That would have led to a potential crisis for the organization. So what they did, the thought process that they put behind it, and the fact that they did nothing, they said nothing because there was nothing left to say, and they stood behind their choice to make this statement was brilliant. And they let the conversation unfold on their channels. They just made sure that everybody was not profane and, not abusive in their language. And they just let it take place until it died out, and they carried on. They said what they had to say. So when we understand, so those are times, for example, where you would let the conversation unfold. And in similar situations where that you're not going to add value to the situation, you kind of let the situation unfold. You allow people to express their emotions, their feelings, their sentiments. You validate those feelings and you move on.
The other piece I hear in that is the piece of being prepared, right? Oreo didn't just put that out. They clearly thought their strategy through. Yes,
100%. And a lot of times I find organizations, they want to make these statements, and maybe not as intense or, as forward as the Oreo example, but they want to put out a hashtag campaign, or they want to do some kind of marketing, and they put out these initiatives, and they don't think through the risk. So the risk that is foreseeable, preventable, and able to be prepared for completely ends up blindsiding the organization unnecessarily. And that's when we make mistakes.
The last part I wanted to ask you about is you talked about the risk of autoresponders. Can you say a little bit about, first of all, what autoresponders are and what that risk is?
Sure. Autoresponders are, I still get amazed when people in organizations are using these in this day and age, but they used to be where they were developed years ago. And basically it's if you get a follower on Twitter, you could program that you blast them out a response to each one of your followers, and you don't have to do it yourself. Or if you get a comment on your Facebook page, you can, have an auto response program. So it's basically, a program that you type in the response and it does it for you. And there's great risk with this on both sides of the fence. And really the thing with autoresponders is that social media is meant to be a platform for two-way communication, and putting out an authentic two-way communication between humans, not between bots or programs or logos. And there's so many examples too of, one, people find them annoying today. When I remember tweeting out recently, I had followed a few people on Twitter, and I got these, auto responses back, and I tweeted out like, how are people still doing this in this day and age? It's not authentic. It's not real. And it's not what social media is all about. And the risk isn't just of, the foreseeable negativity that I'm sure people can kind of picture in their mind. But I remember this story of I think it was Domino's, if I'm not mistaken, where somebody wrote on their Facebook page, something I'm going to totally paraphrase here, but basically they wrote, "Wow, best pizza I've ever had." And it was on an off hour where Domino's isn't on active on their Facebook page. So say it's like 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, let's say. Mm-hmm. And they had an autoresponder that said, "I'm so sorry to hear about your situation. Please send us a direct message and we'll manage it. We'll help you out. We'll deal with it." Basically expecting that the comment would have been negative. Yeah, and that went viral. And it's not a crisis, but it's embarrassing. It's a gaffe. And that's like a lighthearted way. But if you look at it the other way too, if a crisis strikes or a negative issue goes viral and people are emotionally, they're upset and they want to share that emotion with the organization or just, vent or whatever the case may be, if you have autoresponders responding to them, you're going to frustrate them more. You're just adding fuel to the fire. And I talk about, building trust and creating real relationships. And that should be the beacon, the guiding beacon. This just detracts from that.
Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. I want to make sure that I talked a little bit about, what you do at the beginning, but perhaps you could just explain to our listeners a bit about what you do, how you help people, and then again, how they can reach you and learn more about you.
Sure. So there's two sides of what I do. The consulting side is I work very intensely. It sounds like an intense word, but very thoroughly, let's say, with clients, with organizations to help them identify first what their high risk scenarios are, and then to help them develop and then embed a crisis preparedness program so that no matter what happens, when it happens, everybody within the organization really understands how to detect a rising risk, what to do with it, how to escalate it internally, and then what's expected of them, both by external stakeholders as well as their management, their leadership, and how to go ahead and meet those expectations. So I'm a firm believer today that we can no longer solely rely on a crisis plan that sits on a shelf collecting dust, that by the time you reach for that plan, it's already too late. The story's already miles ahead of you. Stakeholder demands are already, funneling in, and you're already behind the game. You're already trying to play catch up. So instead, what I help organizations do is implement a crisis ready culture where the company is able to do from department to department, from region to region, exactly what I just described. And then the other side of my business is I am a keynote speaker. So I get on stage and I basically try to get people uncomfortable with the status quo, which is relying on that crisis plan like they've been doing for decades in many cases, and give them strategies, implementable takeaways and strategies right from the stage that will help them be more crisis ready from the second that I get off stage.
Great. And if people want to learn more about you, where's the best place to go?
Yes, melissaagnes.com. You'll find everything there. I've got a podcast. I've got videos that I put out regularly, in a blog, and so many resources like that flow chart that I mentioned earlier.
Melissa Agnes, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Doug. Great chatting with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
By the way, our show notes and bonus resources can be found on spotoninsurance.com. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.
Thanks for joining us.